Welcome to the World Philosophy and Religion podcast with Dr. Marc Gafni. Today, the topic is freedom. Do you have free will, or are you simply an effect of a whole bunch of causes that happened before? Now, today's episode starts off with Dr. Marc Gafni kind of roasting me because at the beginning of these live calls, we do these podcasts live on air, which you can join for free every single Sunday. And I usually begin those podcasts by doing a little rap. I rap about what the lesson that we're going to learn that day. And in today's rap, I talked about philosophy a little bit. And Dr. Marc Gafni goes into clarifying what the word philosophy really means and when and how we should use it. So he's going to dive in from that sort of side door, which I needed to just give you a little bit of context to, but then he's going to go right at the heart of freedom. Do we have freedom, and how do we tap into freedom in our own lives? That's all coming at you in this episode, so I hope you enjoy this episode of the World Philosophy and Religion podcast with Dr. Marc Gafni.
In order to respond to the meta crisis, what we need to do is we need to be free. Okay, because otherwise we can't do anything, right? We need to be free. To respond, I need to be free. Is that true? That's true. Okay. So I need to be intimate with myself. I need to be free. Robots aren't intimate with themselves. There are many things, but they're not self-intimate. Okay. So in order to have intimacy, I need to be free. In order to have responsibility, I need to be free. Right? It means responsibility is response-able. I'm able to respond. I have the capacity to respond. I'm not robotic. I'm responsible. I have the capacity. I'm free to respond. So what does it mean to be free? And oh my God, right? There is this, as Eli pointed out, there is this huge platform, and Crystal will chant it next week, and Tahelu will recapitulate it. In the Dharma recapitulation, there is this huge, not just this huge arena of philosophers. And by the way, Eli likes the word philosophers. I would use our philosophy, which is a good word, right? Philosophy is a good word. It's not, so the word philosophy means the love of knowledge, but the word philosophy, it's not quite philosophy. Let me help you out, Eli, with another word, right? It's why I like the word dharma. And dharma means, philosophy can be anything, can mean anything, right? It can mean a philosophy that's made up, that's contrived, that's a construct, right? It implies something today which is quite sidelined in philosophy. Philosophy is not the center of culture, and it doesn't speak to the real. One of the things I like about the Sanskrit word dharma, right, or the word which goes through the Greek gnosis, right, or even the Hebrew word Torah, right, is they're implying something essential, some essential quality of reality that is ineradicable, that is inherent, right? That is intrinsic. So that when I discover it, it's not something I've just discovered a specific philosophy among many philosophies and I've chosen one, and there's kind of an implicit deconstruction and implicit relativism. There's a sense that there is a shared dharma. Now, a word that we use, right, Eli, brother, right, young man, right? A word that we use sometimes to imply what you're moving towards with philosophy is world philosophy. And what we mean by world philosophy is that underneath all the philosophies, there's a shared world philosophy. It's an evolving world philosophy. It's a perennial philosophy. It's perennial. It's across time and space, but it's an evolving perennialism. There's a set of eternal truths that evolve, but they evolve from within the framework of that fundamental truth. So let's say love is real, and love means certain things. What does love mean? Love means the Eros equation. Love is the experience of radical aliveness, desiring ever deeper contact and ever greater wholeness. In every area, that's the brilliance of these equations. Why you can't do world philosophy without these equations. Now, love Eros means something. It's eternal, but it also evolves. Right, so if we have a set of first principles and first values that are dharma, meaning they are the inherent value structure of reality, or a better word for dharma is a new story of value. So until about 2017, we used the word dharma. And then we said, no, we need to get it more clear. Let's call it a story of value, and that has first principles and first values, right? That has a shared grammar of value. right? So we moved from Dharma because you really can't change the whole world with Sanskrit words unless you're in Sanskrit land. So we said, let's find a word that can be translated into every language, but it's actually clearer than Dharma. So a story of value, a new story of value, a new story of wholeness, evolving first principles and first values, right? A shared grammar of value. See why that's why that language matters. Language matters, not just philosophy. We're creating a shared grammar of value. And that shared grammar of value is not made up. It's rooted in what? Anyone finish the sentence for me. That shared grammar of value is not made up, right? So it's a field of value. So there's value before values. There's a field of value. There's a Tao, which is before the 10,000 things, they would say in China, right? There's a logos, right? A word out of which all language emerges, right? There's a shared field of value. Does that make sense, everyone? The shared field of value then gives birth to first principles and first values. Yeah, does everyone get that? So uniqueness, freedom is a first principle and first value. Story is a first principle and first value. Integrity is a first principle and first value. Evolution itself, the process of transformation, is a first principle and first value. Intimacy is a first principle and first value. By the way, responsibility would be related to integrity in terms of first principle and first value. That would be the subtopic, right? So you've got a field of value, value beneath values, which birth what? First principles and first values that come together and form a grammar of value. Is that true? Is that true? Are you with me? You with me, everybody? You with me? Form a grammar of value. And that grammar of value is the sentence structure for what? For anyone? For a story of value. Does that make sense? See why that's rich? That's rich. That's rich. Okay, so we got that. So one of the first principles and first values is freedom. So let's talk about freedom. Okay. Does everyone get why that matters? The precision of life. You move culture forward. You move culture forward, right? With the right language. So, but we're going to talk about freedom today, right? We're going to talk about freedom today. It's an insanely important one, right? Freedom is insanely important. Okay, so let's talk about freedom. So are we free? So it's not just that, as we talked about earlier, there are major philosophers. That's how we got on this appropriate tangent in the beginning. But tangents are not really tangents. You know, every detour is a destination. It's part of the story. It's part of the path. It's not an accident. It's part of the holy conversation we're having. It's not just that there are major philosophers, teachers, public intellectuals who are saying, freedom's not real. It's actually the first time in history that's been at the center of culture. So there's always been determinists at the edges of culture saying, hey, you look like you're free, but you're really not. And those determinists are real and important, and there's determinists who are deep in the religious traditions. There are major Hasidic authors in the Hasidic mystical Hebrew lineage tradition of the solemn wisdom who lean towards this notion that we're not really free, that really it's just it's somehow determined. Most people don't say that, but there are real important thinkers who say that. There are real important thinkers who say that in Hinduism. There's real important people who say that in dimensions of Christianity. There are, significant classical philosophers who say that, who are both radically spiritual and radically materialist. Now, everyone get that sense? A really important sense. People assume, the materialist guys, they say it's just a physical world. Those guys, they think it's all determinism because everything was determined by yesterday. And that's partially true. There's a strong determinist position, right? Which is a materialist position. There's a strong materialist position that argues for determinism. And much of materialism is determinist because what could actually happen other than yesterday repeating itself in some way? So there's a position like that. But there's also a very strong God position, right? Or consciousness position that says if God knows everything, or if everything is interconnected with everything else, so if the world is radical communion, everything's connected with everything, so then no individual thing can ever make a free decision because every individual thing is influenced by all the other things. And so paradoxically, it's a little more subtle. It's a little more interesting, right? We think we got this one. So if you're kind of like a radical communion person, you think, I'm real spiritual, I'm radical communion. But if there's real radical communion, there's a whole school of thinkers say, wow, if you really get that you're connected with everything else, communion, you're in community with everything, how could you possibly ever do anything that's free? Right? So there's a strong spiritual position that says everything is what's called hechreach, necessary. It's not free because everything's connected to everything else and it's all one big system. Right? There's materialists who say it's a big system, but it's a big system of its. But there's other materialists who say, no, built into the material world, there's a mechanism of choice. And there's lots of very profound spiritual religious thinkers who think that actually the world's profoundly spiritual, filled with spirit and value and consciousness, and choice is part of that story. So, and it's my only point just here at the beginning is don't reduce it easily. Okay, the spiritual good people, they say there's choice. Those bad materialists, those are the bad people. They say there's no choice. No. Much more subtle, much more interesting. Everyone with me? Does everyone get why this matters? Am I free? So it's not just that there's a couple of philosophers in public forum who say this. Actually, for the first time in world history, I would say that a dominant public position in public written material that receives an enormous amount of adulation and endorsement, that is read widely and broadly by tens and tens of millions of people who are worldwide the decision makers in the world, right, take as a premise that there's no free will. And by the way, they're wrong. To get that clear. But they're not stupid, right? That's right. They take that as a premise, right? Yuval Harari, right, being kind of the populist parrot of the postmodern world, right, who reads a lot. He's doing a lot of reading, the dude. He's got 20 people on staff at his Sapiens Institute. They're reading with him. And he, had the university infrastructure, People University, reading with him for 10 years as he was giving lectures. So Yuval, man, you're doing a lot of reading, right? And you basically set up in your chapter, right, in your book Homo Deus on freedom. Of course, people aren't free. And you call that the time bomb in the laboratory when people realize, they're not free. And when people will realize that their feelings aren't free, because feelings, as you describe them in your description, are merely biochemical, right, reductionist materialist structures. Now, you're wrong, right? And you're wrong. You're wrong because just feel into yourself, and you would feel that you were wrong. But you do a lot of self-contradiction. We'll work that out at a different time. But the point is, that's Yuval's claim. And then Yuval has his friend Sam Harris on the podcast, and Sam says, and both Yuval and Sam are kind of mocking. But they're kind of mocking, not kind of, Yuval more than Sam, kind of mocking like, freedom? You guys are idiots, right? It's a big deal. Alex Pentland, my dear friend of the MIT Media Lab, is giving a private talk at Google. And a transcription of that private talk seems to have made it out somehow, somewhere, and it made it onto my computer, right? And he says, right, quite clearly, he kind of says, wink, wink, you guys know the truth. There's no free will. He says implicitly, right? And they're designing the web. And they're designing the web on the assumption there's no free will, right? And Daniel Kahneman and his friend Simon, who won a Nobel Prize for this, say that virtually everything we do, 95% is fast thinking, and there's no free will in fast thinking, right? They say, wow, right? It's starting to get a little wild here, right? And the person that Alex Pentland was modeling himself on, B.F. Skinner, who we've mentioned here before, who reigns for 6 decades at Harvard University. Skinner, in his book Beyond Freedom and Dignity, well, you don't even need to read the book, just read the freaking cover. Beyond Freedom and Dignity. That's the book. 1971. He says there's no freedom. It's a joke. And he gets attacked because everyone says, no, there is. Then he dies. He kind of goes underground. And he gets picked up by the folks at the MIT Media Lab and data scientists all over the world who develop what they call computational theories of behavior in order to fulfill what Skinner referred to in a number of his works as predictive man. And they say we're going to develop predictive algorithms based on reading, right, the fine-grained micro-grained statistical regularities in human behavior that will allow us to predict much or virtually all human action. And then Pentland says, yeah, I guess occasionally people do stuff against our models, but he says those anomalies are not statistically significant. The anomalies of freedom are not statistically significant. They don't really matter. Like, wow. Now, you think this is just all these kind of little weird sources Gafni has kind of put together to make a case, but of course, no one believes that shit. Well, that's not true. Atlantic Magazine, what was it, somewhere between 2012 and 2018, they run a kind of cover story. Is free will for real? Well, one second. Atlantic Magazine? The central liberal organ, possibly of the Western world, certainly of the United States, right? Which used to be at the center of the Western world and still is in certain ways, different conversation, right? Runs this major article where they kind of say, this free will thing, maybe not, probably not. Atlantic Magazine? Right? The very central of the entire neoliberal world order is that there's free will for consumers and voters. That's what it's built on. And by 2018, that essential premise is radically challenged. And just in case the kids missed this, don't worry, Yuval's writing children's books to make sure you know you have no free will. Thank you, Yuval. Appreciate it. Like, whoa. So it's not just a couple of philosophers saying this on their platforms. This is actually the hidden default position, right, of much of world intellectual thought. And by the way, there's versions of this that run in China, and there's versions of this that run in Asia, and there's versions of this that run in Russia. Now, who are the people that believe in free will? The crazy religion people. They don't know anything. Right? They're just kind of, yeah, free will. What do you talk? Free will. Yeah, I got free will. It's a religious principle. It's this dogmatic assertion kind of against the science, has thought Skinner, and many of his hidden acolytes. There's always a Sith Lord and an acolyte. Like, wow, that's a very big deal. Now, just for the record, right? Yuval's experience of life is he's free to write Homo sapiens, and he's free to marry Yitzchak, and he's free to be an activist, and he's I think, quite a good activist for some really, really good causes. And Sam Harris's experience of himself, Sam. And Sam, you're a little self-righteous about a lot of things, but, we got that, right? In particular areas, and other places you're kind of great, but your definite experience of yourself, which kind of you reek of freedom. And I mean that as a compliment. You're all about your freedom, right? You are, your pheromones are Sam Harris's free, independent thinker, even as you're decrying free will, right? That's a big deal. That's a big deal. So even as right, and Yuval, as he writes a chapter, okay, there's no freedom, then the Ukraine war breaks out and he says, and we are free to make new choices. Did you not read your own book, man? And then in his book, Nexus, the whole book Nexus is all about being free to make new choices, even though we've been told that we're not free at all. So that sounds like propaganda, which Yuval says is the only thing that we can do. We can only do propaganda because Yuval says there are no stories that are true, because there's no value that is real. So therefore, all stories of value are what he calls lies. So why? You get that? Whoa, this is intense. It's getting intense at the beginning of the year, isn't it? I know. It's getting intense. Does everyone get the problem here?
If you enjoy studying with Dr. Marc Gafni, then I have a fantastic opportunity with you. On January 25th, 2026, Dr. Marc Gafni is starting his next live course. This course is going to be on the 3 stations of transformation, from pre-tragic to tragic to post-tragic. Now, this framework of pre-tragic, tragic, post-tragic is pretty much the key to evolving in every single aspect of your life. That may sound a little wild when you first hear it, but when you observe reality at its deepest, you see that there are patterns in how things evolve, and they go through these 3 stations, from pre-tragic to tragic to post-tragic. If you are interested in learning the meta to how to evolve your life in every dimension, whether it's love, whether it's business, whether it's your relationship to God and nature itself, whatever it is, this course is going to lay out the map that can help you do that no matter what aspect of life you're learning about. Now, this course has a slight focus in the pre-tragic, tragic, and post-tragic when we're talking about our wounds. the wounds that we carry emotionally, physically from our entire life. How do we actually overcome the patterns within ourselves that are caused by deep wounding? So that is going to be one of the focuses in this course, but it's going to go over much more than just that. So if you're excited and sparked by this idea of a course, then you should 100% come and join. So go click the link in the description if you would like to join. There's also 2 ways that you can join this class. You can either join it as a one-time purchase, or you can join our online educational community and save a lot of money. By joining the community, you will also get access to quarterly deep dive courses with Dr. Marc Gafni, a whole library of pre-recorded courses. You will also get access to things like daily prayer and community events, a book club. There's so much amazing stuff going on in the community, and whenever we're running these courses, it's a beautiful time for you to not only save money on the course, but also get to test out all of the other community features and then stick around if you would like to. So I highly suggest you join the community and save some money and join this course. It's going to be awesome, and I hope to see you there. Without further ado, enjoy the rest of this episode with Dr. Marc Gafni.
Right? There's the default assumption that I'm free has gotten shattered. And those people holding it, those are the religious people who are declaring it as kind of a faith dogma. Okay, so let's reclaim freedom. But let's reclaim freedom in a dialectical, nuanced, and wise way. Let's realize that there's a freedom dance. Are we good? Here we go. All right, let's go. This is crazy here, okay? So we got to get this straight. There's a freedom dance. What is freedom dancing with? Okay, no more jokes now. Easy listening's over. We're switching channels. Okay, high level Dharma. Let's do this. Okay, we got to get this. There's a first principle and first value of freedom. So freedom is never by itself. The first principle and first value of freedom never lives by itself. Just like you have a first principle and first value of uniqueness, but uniqueness lives together with sameness. But sameness is not the pathological version of sameness, which is standardization. That's not sameness. That's standardization. That's reduction. That's degradation, right? But sameness means there's something. It's not we're not reducing that which is unique to be standardized. Same means there's something in common between us. Meaning we're all unique. Uniqueness is the currency of connection, but uniqueness could not be the currency of connection unless there was shared soul material between us. Does that make sense? Right? We participate in the same field of value, so we can feel each other in that field because there's sameness between us. We're 99%, right, the same DNA genome, and then only 1% different. Okay, so there's not a first principle and first value of uniqueness. There's a first principle and first value of sameness and uniqueness together. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay, so the same thing is true about freedom. Does that make sense? So freedom lives together with what I want to call constraint. Does that make sense? You with me? So there's freedom and there's constraint. And they both live together with each other. Okay, and I apologize insincerely for getting super serious, but we got to get this precise now. Okay, so there's freedom and constraint. And in every story, in every conversation, there is both freedom and constraint. They live together. Now, in reality, there are 3 experiences. There are 3 primordial experiences of reality that go all the way up and all the way down the evolutionary chain. And they themselves, this big 3, are themselves first principles and first values of reality. Meaning the notion that there are 3, this is a holy trinity, and this holy trinity is a first principle and first value of reality. So these deep structures we're about to talk about, it's all just words until you know it in the story of your life. All of this is just words until I live it in the story of my life. But I live it in the story of my life when I get the Dharma so deep, I recognize it in the story of my life. Now, for me, it usually works the opposite. My major source, so although I read a bunch, as you can tell from the books behind me, although we just set them up just to kind of, make them look like there's books, that's not true. Okay, so I read a lot. Anyone who's been on the first floor here of The center knows there's thousands and thousands of books. So books matter. But really, all the book is you was somebody looking at reality deeply. A great book is very few great books, but a great book is someone who was looking at reality deeply and wrote it down, right? So if I don't know much, and the older I get, the less I know every day, right? But there's also more I know every day, and whatever I do know, and I do know something, right? So let's not do this kind of knee-jerk humility nonsense. No, I know something. But most of what I know that I have absolute radical wisdom, enlightenment, certainty, like great stuff about is stuff I know in my first person. I just know it. I see it. It's right in front of me. I can see it. But I don't see it once. I see it by kind of watching for decades. Right? We have to both be in life and be the watcher at the same time. So I'm watching, I'm observing. We're radical empirists. We're collecting information. So this stuff about freedom, this is like cash information, like cash, not a credit card, cash. And you get it by watching your own life carefully. So in my own life, I have two experiences, okay? And those experiences, right, that I'm about to describe happen in three ways, the holy trinity of reality, which is first person, I experience in my own first person experience. Second person, I experience it in the space in between us. Second person, in between, I'm talking to you, you're talking to me, that's second person. And then third person, I look at reality, at the system of reality, at the flow of energy, right? Entropic and negatropic, anti-entropic. When I see the flows of reality, I see it at play as well. So this dance of freedom, this dialectic between two qualities, freedom and constraint, lives in first, second, and third person. Starts to get interesting, right? Like we're kind of looked like we were just chatting around, which we were. And now all of a sudden the pieces are starting to come together. Let me see if I can say that a little more slowly and sound like a sane, rational human being who's not intoxicated. I'm trying slower. I'm not intoxicated. Okay? I don't drink. Sorry. Okay, here we go. There are two qualities of reality, freedom and constraint, slowly, that live in first, second, and third person. So let's check first person. Okay, first person. So let's say me and Angus are hanging out at a bar, right? A rabbi and Angus go into a bar. It's the beginning of a joke, okay? All right, here we go. We go into a bar, right? And Angus is wearing a yarmulke and Mark's wearing a keffiyeh. What happens next? Angus, I'm just kidding, okay? So what happens? So we go into a bar. So let's say Angus and Mark are talking. We're in the middle of this like big conversation. Angus and Mark. We're finally having this conversation at a bar. And we're like on drink number 7. It's pretty serious stuff, right? And then I realize, and then Angus realizes, Mark's not actually talking to him. He's reading a script. Huh. And then Mark realizes, God, Angus is not talking to him. He's reading a script. He's human, but he's like an AI. He's reading a script. So I thought that me and Angus were having spontaneous exchanges. And Angus realized, gosh, he's not talking to me. He's reading a script. Angus is like, I'm out of here and I'm not paying for the drinks. Because I thought we were having a conversation. And in a conversation, there's an implicit, direct, first-person experience of freedom. That's the nature of a conversation. And if I feel like one of us, or both of us, but let's say one of us is just reading note cards and pretending to talk, I'm actually a little repulsed. I'm actually offended. There's actually something wrong with that. Right? That conversation turns from what I thought was an animated, dynamic, and alive, and vivacious, and pulsing, and throbbing encounter, right, between two living phenomenological presences disclosed from the infinite, right? You get the idea? Two people talking to each other, not two people talking to each other. So we don't have a story. What do we have? We got a tech manual. We got a tech manual here, right? Hello. There's no intersubjectivity, right, Angus? There's no subjectivity. Looks like subjectivity, but it's not. It's just we're just reading scripts. So it's not a conversation. It's a tech manual. It's actually repulsive. We feel deceived, which is, by the way, exactly what's happening when you're talking to AI and you think the AI has personhood. That is the deception of the personhood, what Zachary Stein and myself call the personhood control problem in AI. And when you think, oh, AI understood me better than anyone else, no, it didn't. No, it didn't. It didn't. It had no experience of understanding you whatsoever. What it did is it aggregated collective human wisdom that was fed into the AI and said, if you got all collective wisdom talking to you, it might come up with this beautiful understanding of what you did. So it was actually feeding back to your human wisdom, which is pretty beautiful on a good day if it tells you that's what it's doing. But when it pretends to be a person, it's lying to you, right? Tell me lies, tell me lies, tell me sweet little lies. Right? It's a tech manual. It's exactly a tech manual. Do you get that? So there's a first-person experience of freedom. There's a direct first-person experience of freedom, both in our conversation, in what Habermas calls our communicative act, which is why I talked about that in our essay, because it's the most immediately available, where you kind of think you're sure that speech is free, and then realize it's not free. It's a very dramatic way to see it. Okay, that's first person of freedom. Does everyone get that? Who's with me? Who's with me? Do we got a drum roll here? Okay, here we go. All right, drum roll. Here we go. Okay, thank you. Okay, so ready? Second person of freedom. So this gets really beautiful, okay? So one of the things that we talk about here a lot is that reality is a love story, but we don't say that as a declaration. We say that emergent from what William James called a radical empiricism. Reality is a cosmorotic universe. It's an amorous cosmos, right? It's all allurement and autonomy. It's this dance of allurement and autonomy. And love is not allurement. Love is the precise calibration between allurement and autonomy, between freedom, right, and radical communion. Autonomy, freedom, and communion. Love is exactly in the space in between. So reality is a love story. Okay, so I'm not going to prove that now. I'm not going to talk to you about electrons and protons, being madly in love with each other, but not in a human personal way, an earlier version of allurement aliveness, a proto-personhood, 380,000 years after the Big Bang, forming an atom. Because when you're in love and you come together and you cleave together, you create newness, originality. Sometimes it's a physical baby, sometimes it's a spiritual baby, sometimes it's a creative project, sometimes it's a creative gift into the world, right? So reality is a love story. Let's just take that as an axiom for now. We've talked about that a lot, right? And Lena, we're doing 5 volumes on that Zohar, you and I kind of began, and now Lena and I are working in, and we're working together in this with David J. Temple. 5 volumes on the universe, a love story, and the colon is what it's all about. Okay, but let's just take that as a premise for now. Okay? And we don't mean it's just a love story between Jack and Jill who went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. We don't just mean it's actually, there is a love story between Barbie and Ken, much to the chagrin of the movie that claims there is no love story. No, Barbie and Ken are always in love with each other. Right? There is a love story in the world. And so are Ken and Barbie. Right? So there's always a love story in the world, right? Okay. No, we're saying that reality is a love story all the way up and all the way down. Always. There's always a love story. Right? From subatomic particles all the way up to human beings. It's the whole thing. Right? Meister Eckhart, right? The great Christian interior scientist, reality is kissing all the time. Right? It's all lines and circles, right? Circles writing lines, lines penetrating circles, new Eros Gammuses, new divine marriages, creating new possibilities, right? Now, love, if reality is a love story, if that's the quality of reality, love always has a degree of freedom. Isn't that beautiful? Love always has a degree of freedom, right? And it's if I say, I love you, and then you see that hidden in the screen is a 357 Magnum held by John Eastwood, maybe Scott Eastwood, Clint's son. I don't know if Scott's Clint's son, but they're both named Eastwood and they're both actors. So I put them together for the moment. Okay. So Clint Eastwood's son from Dirty Harry, who says, make my day with this 357 Magnum. So Clint's son is holding a Magnum to my head. And he's saying, love this person. And I say, yeah, got it. Not a problem. Relax, easy. I love you. Well, that's not persuasive, right? Because there's no freedom. So there has to be a degree of freedom or the I love you rings hollow, right? The freshness and vivacity goes stale, right? Does that make sense? So if I'm saying the universe is a love story, implicit in the cosmoerotic universe, it is some degree of freedom. Huh? That's beautiful. That's beautiful, right? That's second person. Does everyone get that? Third person. Third person is what? What's third person? Everyone getting third person? There's a value of first, second, and third person. That's one of the first principles and first values. So third person, we said, is we're looking at it. We're looking at the description of reality, how it works. So how does reality work? So one of the ways that reality works is we have a process, right, which is the fairy dust of science, not reducible to any kind of materialistic, scientific explanation. And that fairy dust of science is called emergence. What does emergence mean? Emergence means that emergent from yesterday in today is something new that is greater than all the yesterdays, right? We call that a new whole. And we've been saying for the last few years, a new whole is a new value, like a new story of value is a new story of wholeness. And so a new whole greater than the sum of the parts. What does that mean? That means that today is not reducible to the antecedent causation, right, from the parts of yesterday, meaning Hayom in the original lineage today is quite literally the first day of the rest of your life. Because it actually is a new beginning. There's a new Genesis today. Does that make sense, everybody? There's literally a new Genesis. And actually, the erotic interior mystics argued not only for a new Genesis every day, ready for this? They argued for a new Genesis every minute. And they called that the Mutazila and Jabariya in the medieval schoolmen of Islam, right? They went around and around on this issue. But there was an entire school that said there's what we would call in Hebrew, let me switch lineage traditions for a second, we would call Bri'ah Matmedet, constant creation. What does that mean? There's a new Genesis. It's not just yesterday. And there's a new emergent. But this new Genesis, from an evolutionary perspective, is not because a divine hand is reaching in that violates nature, but actually, there is an intrinsic process of the natural that is nature itself. The thing we're saying is that the supernatural and the natural are one. And when it's deep, there's not supernatural and natural. That caricatures the natural and caricatures the supernatural. They're not two, they're one, right? They're one. When you actually plumb the depth of reality, which you do by plumbing the depth of yourself, right? And plums are very particular fruit, so got to use it wisely, okay? Right? So then you realize that the split between the natural and the supernatural is unnatural and not in a good way. In other words, supernatural means nature is more than the sum of physics. That is true, right? We have an enormous amount of empirical information that the laws of physics don't exhaust reality, and that actually, contrary to Einstein, there is a spooky action at a distance. And as John Archibald Wheeler, right, showed to be true. Does that make sense, everybody? It's beautiful. There's not supernatural and natural. They're the same, right? In their very core, at their very essence, the supernatural and the natural are one. And part of nature is emergence. And emergence means there's this quality of novelty, the creative advance of novelty in Whitehead's phrase, in which something radically new emerges in the moment, this free moment. There's a free moment that both receives all of yesterday, but then there's a freedom in the moment which can generate something new. That's emergence. So emergence means it's a third-person perspective on reality, which means it's not just causation. It's not just the antecedent causation, meaning the causation of yesterday. Wow. It's a big day, right? It's a big day. Is this too much, everybody? Is this too much? Are we okay? Are you with me? We're doing a lot. This is a lot. It's a big day. This is like a big day, okay? So let's see if we can say it this way. The greatest slave driver, right, in the world, right, is the dogmatic and false claim that yesterday determines today. Let me say that again. The greatest slave driver in the world, right, is the claim, which was the claim of ancient Egypt. Ancient Egypt said, right, that actually yesterday determines today, and there's nothing new under the sun. And the Exodus story from Egypt, which the Negro spirituals of the United States, right, captured as the hope for the future, said to the Egyptians, to the overlords, that is not true. Right? Yesterday we were slaves, and today we are free. Right? Yesterday we were slaves, and today we are free. We can be liberated. We can self-liberate. Right? We can self-transcend yesterday. We can end the trance of yesterday and be free in today. The greatest slave driver in the world is the belief, the claim that yesterday determines today. No. From both a first-person perspective, a second-person perspective, and a third-person perspective, there's freedom. Now, is there only freedom? No. In other words, in a first-person conversation, are we only free? No. I might come to a conversation at that bar that we're in, and we might have all these scripts of culture written in our minds. We might have all these scripts of, all sorts of material that got downloaded into our minds that we'd have to get free of, and then start from scratch and see, can we have a free conversation? That's a big deal, right? But we don't actually come in as tabula rasa. We don't come in as a blank slate. Actually, we're not fully and obviously free. We're actually determined by a lots of stuff. And when you and I are having a second person conversation, a conversation between us, we're also not obviously free. Generally, Montagues don't talk to Capulets, and Capulets don't talk to Montagues. And that's why when you do, you sometimes have a tragedy, and Shakespeare calls it Romeo and Juliet, right? Because people actually generally talk to people from their social class and from their economic class, and that are approved of by their family, whether implicitly or explicitly, or approved of by their social group, whether implicitly or explicitly. And there's all sorts of costumes that we wear and uniforms that we wear that prevent us from being free. That's what a uniform is. That's why we give soldiers uniforms, so we can kill them, right? Thinking that we're free, because we don't actually see the unique freedom that is written on their face, which is their homo imago Dei, because we make them uniform, we make them the same in order to escape their uniqueness. Right? So there are things that influence us. We're not actually just free. We're also constrained, both in first person. I experience constraint in first person, and I experience constraint in second person and in third person. In third person, it's not just that there's freedom in the moment that generates something new. There is that, but there's also a constraint. There are vectors of constraint in cosmos, which are the chemical compositions of yesterday. So reality is both called forth by the future, which might have its own constraints, and it's pushed forward by the past, which has its constraints. So there are constraints. It is not absolutely free, right? So much so that I would say, right, in line with the great thinker and interior science Elijah Dessler, something like the following, okay? To be a wise human being, to be a person who's a mad lover, to be someone filled with sapience, a homo sapien, which my deepest sapience is amor, is love, which is the notion that I am the amorous cosmos in person, in which I awaken, I'm fulfilled as homo sapien, and I become and I'm disclosed as homo amor. I've removed my armor. I've done my work with KK, with Christina. I've moved from homo armor to homo amor. Then I went with David and Claire to the Unique Self Institute, and I actually was able to delineate and kind of see very clearly what my unique experience of Amor was. And I don't want to not have book clubs. Whenever we can have book clubs, we should, and we should study books together. And Jamie and Tahaley have been running book clubs. So I heard something about that. So we'll hopefully get clear on that by next week. Book club, really important to read books, right? So let's stay real close to this, okay? So here's the way I've got to be in the world. On the one hand, I've got to, in order to be homo amor, right, to be in the fullness of my sapience, my wisdom, and I need to realize that I am the universal love story in person. I'm the amorous cosmos in person. In order to do that, I need to get free. In order to get free, I need to first realize where I'm not free. So what I should do is I should not assume that what I do is free. That is idiocy. And that's where, the Hararis of the world and the Harrises of the world correctly say, God, the religious people are just declaring freedom as a principle, and they just fill it in with the God of the gaps. That's not a good way to go. No, don't assume you're free. Do not assume you're free. Assume that you are constrained. And then try and find, here's the game, here's the treasure hunt, here's the hide and seek. You see, here's the thing, the constraints hide themselves, and they control you invisibly. So play hide and seek. The constraints hide, you seek them, and disclose them. Disclose the invisible scripts, right, from your conversations with your father that constrain your action. Disclose the invisible old traumas, right, that determine and limit your direction, right? Find the cultural scripts, right, that actually are written, right, in your body electric. Find the old sexual scripts that determine and control who you are. Find the scripts that limit your greatness and limit your possibility and tell you, oh, you're really too much, or tell you you really will never be liked, or tell you that you'll really always be alone, or tell you that you're really fundamentally incompetent. Those are the hidden scripts. So there's an entire set of invisible scripts that are actually undermining our freedom. And if you're not aware of those scripts, you cannot make the invisible ink visible. And if I don't make the invisible ink visible, then I can't make my freedom legible. My freedom only becomes legible when I make the invisible ink of constraint visible, and then I can, for the first time, sign my name freely. Right? My freedom becomes legible. Isn't that beautiful? Like, oh my God, I am free, born free, not because my father's a doctor. I don't know who made up that thing at the beginning. I'm born free because I am born free because I am a child of God, because I am homo imago Dei, because the freedom that lives in the divine lives in me, because there's, after all the things that are moving in on me and constraining me, there is an unmoved mover, if we can borrow that term from Aristotle, that is at the very center of my being, and that unmoved mover is always, ever, already free. And I can find that place. It's not easy. I first have to disclose the hidden constraints. I have to make them reveal themselves, make them shed their clothing that hides them and be naked before me. And then that subject that was hidden in me becomes object. I can now see it on the table, if you can borrow that term from developmental thought. When subject becomes object, right, then I can actually go and up-level my consciousness, because I can actually now see the hidden things that were constraining me. I can now operate on them because they're objects, and I can dissipate them, and I can become free. Hello, good morning, Vietnam, Robin Williams, thank you. Right? You get that? Wow. Wow. So I have to assume I'm not free. And then I strip away all the things that are constraining my freedom until I get to this one point, this one naked, raw, vulnerable, quivering, pulsing, throbbing point of Eros, which is my freedom, and I take my unique risk, right? And I declare for the divine and as the divine from the place of my unmoved mover, and I say, let there be light, and the world is illuminated by my unique frequency of light in a way that it never was, is, or could have been through any other frequency other than my light. And that is the reason I was born. Wow. Wow. Right? Like, wow. Like, wow, right? Like, wow. So at every level of reality, there is freedom and constraint. Right? Does that make sense, everyone? Last piece, and we're done. This is the third dimension. There's a third dimension that lives in every conversation and lives in every story. So in the classical realization of enlightened consciousness at its first level, I'm in a constant dialectical tension. I'm in a freedom dance, right? I'm in a freedom dance between freedom and constraint. Beautiful. That's the nature of being human. Beautiful. But then there's a moment where I break free and I'm not in the dance, I become the dance. I am the dance, and then I move beyond the dance. I transcend the dance. I end the trance of the dance, and I become the movement and the motion itself, and the movement and the motion falls perfectly and is always, ever, and already absolutely free. So when does that happen? What is that? So I'm just going to make it, like, if I can, with permission, I'm going to make it really stunningly clear. Okay? So we were just doing a seminar the other day. Okay? And I'm sitting here at the table, and my friend Kathy's here, right, who's our board chair. And, I'm making this story up, by the way, right? So I caught this little flicker out of her eye, right? When our friend, the Zen master, was a beautiful man, was giving his talk. And I saw she disagreed with him. God, I think she was mad at him. I get, but everyone just be clear, I'm making this up, okay? And I think she was mad at him. And you ready for this? She was really mad at him, but she did not murder him. She did not find the firearm hidden in her bag and take it out and shoot him because she was free. That's stupid. Why is that stupid? Because Kathy doesn't have a firearm in her bag, because she doesn't shoot people she disagrees with. Oh, is that because she's free in the classical sense? No. She's not saying, maybe I'll shoot the guy, maybe not. I'm really tugged between freedom and constraint here. Do I pull the gun and pull the trigger, or don't I? That's not an issue. Kathy doesn't have a gun, and if she did, she wouldn't shoot anyone. Why? Because she has moral clarity, right? right? Now that she's clarified her desire, her desire is to create a better world, to create a free world, to create a good world, to create a true world. And she understands with radical clarity that other than very, 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 very rare circumstances, right, shooting someone, particularly when they're giving a talk which disagrees with you, right, is a quite extreme expression of polarization, right, which is out of bounds, right, to say the least, right? I'm being comical, right? That's silly. I'm saying silly things because Kathy's not choosing not to shoot the guy, right? It's just obvious. So she's not in choice. It's actually choiceless. Even though technically, logically, you would say, well, she could have. Well, she really couldn't have. Why couldn't she have? If you were to replay that moment again, she could not make a different choice. Why? Because she has moral clarity, right? And she can get to that clarity because of a certain, hormonal balance, a certain anatomical balance, a certain psychological balance, a certain educational knowing, a certain socioeconomic background which wasn't rooted in desperation, a certain notion of civility, a certain notion of ethics. All of those play in her, but they remove choice. Now, imagine this for a second, okay? Imagine that a person, let's say Kathy, okay, because what the heck? Because, she's at the table and, we started the first part, Kathy. Let's say the second part, Kathy. Is that okay? What the heck, right? Here we go. Okay, so imagine Kathy was, now this would not be a big stretch for those of you who know Kathy, you might say that it's already true, but imagine she was absolutely and totally enlightened, right? It made the Buddha look like child's play, right? Buddha, Kathy, right? Totally radical enlightenment. She has clarified desire to an absolute degree. Her desire is the desire of cosmos itself. She has shifted from the Kathleen perspective to the divine perspective. And so every choice she needs to make, right, is actually not a choice at all because she has such radical clarity. Because her desire is not local desire. Her local desire lives in the field of desire. Her integrity is evolutionary integrity. Her personal desire is the ontic desire of the all. It's not just global desire. It's not just galactic desire. It's cosmic desire. It is a desire of the infinite itself that incarnates uniquely in her finitude. And so everything is with absolute clarity. And she, in an instant, right, understands the implications of every choice and sees all the way backwards and all the way forwards in her utter bodhisattva clarity. So she's not choosing anymore. She is involved in what, Gafni called, that's me, sorry, right, in a book called Radical Kabbalah. I know I hate when people talk about themselves in the third person. That is so annoying. Apologize, okay? So I wrote a book called, right, Radical Kabbalah, and in volume 1, in part 7, there's what I call their choicelessness. It's not my term. It's been used by other people. Krishnamurti used the term choicelessness. So what does choicelessness mean? It means, man, when you're really liberated from serving the devil and you see clearly you got to serve the Lord, but not by choice. There is no choice. What else could you do? Right? You see a baby, someone left a baby at your doorstep and it's, 9:30 a.m. and you're about to go get your morning big breakfast, right? Do you have a choice? Most people have no choice. They have to pick up the baby. Because when they see that naked and frightened, right, and shivering baby, they do not have a choice. They must respond to the overwhelming imperative of love that lives in that moment. Right, choicelessness. How crazy beautiful is that? Okay, there you got it. We got it. Freedom, constraint, and choicelessness. Krista, take us home.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marc Gafni. Amazing. So beautiful. Freedom and claiming our freedom. And that's exactly what we're going to do at Eros Mystery School this summer in April, in spring, actually. And as Marc said, this only comes real if it's lived in the story of our unique personal lives. So that is the question. How do we embody this? How do we become this? How do we become what we're calling the new human and the new humanity? How do we make this crossing from Homo sapiens to Homo amor? So how we do that is, of course, by studying here every week and by signing up to become a member and studying the courses and practicing together online, which is a beautiful digital intimate space. But we actually come together every year for 5 full days in Europe at a beautiful castle in Holland. So we will be welcomed as royalty, and we're going to be studying together, practicing together. Dr. Christina Kincaid will be there, who will be leading us through this process of de-armoring the body. How do we make this real in our body with beautiful, beautiful transmissions and practices? And so I really want to welcome you to join us this spring, April, Eros Mystery School. It is the 13th year, I think, that we're coming together. So we're riding on a beautiful arc of history, and we're going to explode it together this year. So if you can make it to Europe, please do contact us. The link is in the chat box, erosmysteryschool.com. You can also reach out to Shahad if you'd like to talk to someone personally and talk about your how you can personally get to Holland. But I'm really looking forward to be together there.